And this week we're going to be looking at hints and tips for helping agents to be better at their job. We've got two brand new speakers on the webinar program today. I think you're going to be delighted with both of them. And just like to welcome to you Daniel Ord from OmniTouch, based in Singapore. We came across Daniel probably about a year ago on LinkedIn, have been trading messages since. And Daniel's recently published an excellent article on Call Center Helper. So Daniel, if you'd like to introduce yourself and describe what OmniTouch do.
Sure, Jonty, thank you. I consider myself a veteran of the industry now, 30 years. In the US, I managed large call centers, ended up in Asia, which is a story in and of itself. And after a couple of years working at outsourcers in Asia, I decided to set up a consultancy and training company. And my main purpose was to help people avoid all the mistakes that I made. Because like most people, I ended up in the career completely by accident and without any background in the industry whatsoever. So I hope that I can be of help to people that may feel that they were in the same or are in the same position that I was at that time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's certainly a very interesting industry. I have a friend who left the industry last year in October, and guess what? He's back in now. And I said it's one of those industries you can check out anytime you like, but you can never really leave. So, Patrick, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so Patrick Russell, I've been in the industry for 15 years. I spent the first decade managing a few large-scale operations from 1,000 seats to 5,000 seats. Very much like Daniel said, this was not my intended career, but I got into it and enjoyed it and never wanted to leave. Been in the software side of our industry for the last 4 or 5 years and really just enjoying this side of the house.
Excellent. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. Well, we've got a replay available later on this afternoon, callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. If you're not already logged in, if you'd like to log into our chat room, here's the address, callcenterhelper.com/chat. It is in a separate window, so if you can put the two windows side by side, you can see the webinar slides and the chat room, and you can download the webinar slides from there. There is a bottle of champagne. In fact, here's the bottle of champagne for the best tip that is sent in by the audience. That's in addition to the tips that we've got today. And we're having a discussion in the chat room where we're asking, how empowered are your agents? Are they, for instance, self-managed? Can they speak as long as they like? And we've got some quite interesting answers coming through. Jeffrey says he's working on an agile transformation, trying to have self-organized teams. And Matthew says, we've had no restrictions overall, but we have empowerment is restricted due to external contractors and other areas in the business. So hopefully we'll be able to pick up some tips as we move forward. So I'd just like to hand across now to Daniel. We'll get your presentation up on the lined up on the screen here, and then if you'd like to take us through your thoughts.
Of course. Well, first off, I think the title of your webinar is terrific, How to Help Agents Be Better at Their Jobs. That hits a sweet spot for me. And I think, again, I want to keep the focus very much on them today. So I think if you're a boss and you're responsible for hiring or managing contact center agents, the first thing you have to do is help them be successful in their job. And I think that means you have to really understand the job and break the job down. So I tend to look at the agent job as 3 different elements. And I've got the 3 elements up here on the slide that you can see now. I want to need my agent's productivity. I want to need my agent's quality. And I want to need my agents' attitudes. And let's be honest, if we get these 3 things from our agents, life is good and we can worry about many other things. And to sum it up, I call it PQ&A. And for purposes of our talk today, Chanti, I'd like to walk through each one by one. So if it's okay, I'd like to start with productivity. So here we go. Okay, so what I have here is a slide showing a team of agents and their productivity performance. I'm a big believer that every agent deserves to know how they're doing. And so at the end of the month, they get some kind of numerical score. The higher the score, the higher the productivity. The lower the score, the lower the productivity. So on the screen, I've got 15 agents. And as you can see, the productivity performance is a bit all over the place. You've got some lower performers. You can see Sam, Ann, and Jan up on the left-hand or at the top of the screen. And down at the bottom, you can see Emma, Dee, and Linda. And they've got much higher productivity performance. In this case, my scale is running from a 5 up to a 25. One of the questions that will strike people straight away is, do you think the manager or the team leader of this team is doing a good job of managing productivity? And without even meeting the team leader or meeting the agents, you can safely conclude that probably not, because there's simply too much of a variation in performance amongst all these agents. The purpose of that yellow box, which is called out at the bottom, is that if we were able to bring all the agents up to, let's say, Linda's level of performance, Linda's our high performer, we've got a potential gain in productivity of 40%. And I don't know any boss that wouldn't jump up and down if you told them you could earn a 30 or 35 or 40% performance improvement overall. So the challenge I always find is, how do we define productivity? And again, we need to stay very focused on the agent level. What is productivity for a contact center agent? So Jonty, I think that takes us to the next slide, and even a poll.
Indeed. So we've got a poll question, which is the following important measures of agent productivity in your contact center? Perhaps pick up to 3 of these. Is it calls handled per day, week, or month? Is it occupancy? Is it average handling time? Is it adherence to schedule? Is it shrinkage? Which ones do you think are the important measures of agent productivity in your center? Patrick, I don't know if you've got any guesses for which answer you think is going to come up high on here.
Yeah, excuse me. I think the first 2 will probably show up on there, and probably some adherence, if I had to guess, is our top 3.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the have a look at the results here. We have a sample size of 72 on this poll, and what we're seeing is that indeed the average handling time is viewed as the most important measure of productivity. That's quite interesting. I've got a few concerns on that one, I've got to say. Then we have calls handled per day, week, month, followed by 53% say adherence, 35% say occupancy, and 12% have opted for shrinkage. So across to you, Daniel.
Okay, so here we go. And Patrick, I completely agree with you, and I think we saw the answers that we somewhat expected. So let's talk about agent level productivity. And what we have to keep in mind is, one of the fundamental things you do when you assign a metric is you make sure a person has a high degree of control over the outcome. If they don't have control over the outcome, it can be quite unfair to measure them on that. So here we go. If you talk about number of calls handled per day, per week, per month, that's completely incorrect. It's not valid under any scenario. If you know your contact center operations, agents don't control the number of calls they handle or the number of live chats they handle. That's based on your service level objective. That's based on your staffing. It's always been incorrect, but I think it became very popular because when people get into the contact center industry, they want to say, Dan, what can I grab onto that will prove to me productivity? And their mind immediately goes to a factory setting. So if I work in a factory, how many widgets can I make in a day or a week or an hour? And they try and apply that factory logic to contact centers. But the reason that doesn't work is because when you're dealing with phone calls or live chats or even walk-ins, is you're dealing with random call arrival. And that means the mathematics are completely different. So while we could go on and on and on calls handled per day, per week, per month, that is always incorrect. And it actually, as some of you may have found out in your experience, drives very negative behavior. Agents tend to keep calls short. They hang up on calls. I work with one IT support desk in India where the folks were targeted on, I think it was 80 calls a day. And they told me, Dan, sometimes we finish our 80 calls by noon and we relax the rest of the day. So later on, when I had to talk with the bosses, they said, my goodness, Dan, should we let all the staff go? And I said, no, I think you should go home, look in the mirror and sack yourself, because you were the one that set this target, and all these folks are doing is following what you gave them. So we have to be a bit fair. So the first one doesn't lie in control of contact center agents. If that's not clear to you, my strong recommendation is get some solid operations training, read some articles. When it comes to quantity, the only quantity measures that you can apply relate to things like email or correspondence or case handling, because these activities don't have to be handled when they're presented to you. They can be handled later. So for example, I have no issue targeting people on the number of emails they handle over a course of time, but I can't apply that same logic to phone calls or live chats. So now let's go to average handling time. Again, no surprise to see that big, but let's go back to what I said earlier. When you assign a metric to someone, you want them to be largely in control of being able to achieve that metric. But at the end of the day, agents may have roughly 20% control over average handling time. Complexity of the customer, the software they're using. I've met agents who sometimes have to open 17 different screens to serve a customer. I also meet clients that say, Dan, every day at 4 o'clock our system hangs because that's our busiest time. We're also universal, which means all of our agents are cross-trained on multiple types of inquiries. And let's say if you're in the telecoms industry, I really don't even know how agents in the telecoms industry survive with all the things they need to know. So when you truly look at the drivers of average handling time, and I think Patrick's going to talk about this a bit later, the biggest improvements to AHT come through process improvement and technology. They don't come through bashing agents. In fact, globally, AHT keeps going up as things like self-service and chatbots and so on take over the simple inquiries. So that's AHT, which is always controversial. Occupancy should never be targeted at the agent level. Agents don't control their level of occupancy. That is something that's a very high level senior metric used to take a look at how resources are utilized. So we never measure agents on occupancy. Now we get to number 4. Ta-da, ding, 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 we win the award. Adherence to schedule. An agent does have a high degree of control over whether they sign in on time, sign out on time, come back from their break on time, if they're a smoker, not smoke 52 cigarettes and disappear for the afternoon. We always used to have problems with smokers. I won't go into that, but that's always a challenge. So adherence to schedule for most of the leading centers we work with tends to be the biggest measure of productivity for a contact center agent. The last one, shrinkage, that was the trick answer. You don't measure shrinkage against agent performance. Shrinkage is a forecasting measure used to help you plan your staffing resources. But before I close out on this slide, let me say this. Most clients I work with end up creating what they call a basket of productivity metrics. So they may put 2 or 3 things in the basket. Adherence is always the biggest, 70 to 80% or more. I see some clients put in AHT, but here's what they'll say. They'll say, Dan, we get it. We get that agents don't have full control over AHT, but we still want to put in, let's say 10 or 15% AHT just to let them know that it's something that we look at, like Patrick said earlier. And one of my favorite things I see in this basket is, funny enough, service level performance. As we all know, you can't target an agent against service level performance. They don't control service level. But I've seen some pretty forward-thinking clients say, you know, Dan, we still put in 5 or 8% of their overall productivity measure based on service level, because when service level works, life is good. And when service level doesn't work, life is not so good. And if we're all in the same boat, the boat should rock when life isn't so good. So that's productivity. And I'll put it this way. If you want your agents to do better at their job, feel more in control of their job, I agree with the empowerment discussion. I think that's a very interesting topic of its own. But I would say the first thing we all have to get right is measure our staff on the right things. There's just no substitute for that. So that's the productivity side. Did you want to relook at the poll, John T., or move on to the quality section? What do you think?
Well, let's move on to the quality section. We've got another.
No problem. So in the same breath, at the end of every month, I want to give my agent a quality score because I want their productivity and I want their quality. And so I've given you a diagram, same agents again. This time I'm measuring them on quality. So we've got some high performers in quality here. Again, at the bottom, Bev and Ann, and so on. And at the top of the charts are low performers in quality, or people like Lori and Jean. Now, again, when you look at this, you ask yourself, is the team leader or manager of this team, are they doing a good job of driving quality in the team? Or maybe with this, the gentleman that said he has empowered teams, are they doing a good job of working together to create quality? If you see this result, the answer is clearly no, because the quality performance is all over the place. Now, I'm the first to admit, if you're a team leader and you're responsible for what I call the newbies, in other words, all the fresh agents who graduate from training come to you because you have a gift for bringing up the brand new ones, this may be your result because they're new. But if you've had a team of agents working for you for 6 months, a year plus, and these are the results you're getting, it's usually an indicator that not much monitoring and coaching is taking place. So again, and the thing I like about quality is it should not contradict or be in contention with our productivity measures. So why don't we take a look at the things we can measure for quality here? And Shanti, I think we've got another poll for quality.
Indeed, we've got another poll for quality. Which of the following measures of agent, which of the following are important measures of agent quality in your center? Is it call scoring or monitoring of interactions? That could be phone calls or live chats or emails. Is it net promoter score? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it first contact resolution? Or is it empathy? So if you just like to pop the figures, perhaps pick the up to the top 3 that I think apply in your center. So which are the most important measures of quality? We've got about 2/3 of people voted so far, so we're waiting for a few more to come through. Patrick, any views of what you think will come up here?
Yeah, I think pretty confidently we'll see call scoring, net promoter, and well, I guess CSAT and first contact resolution. So if I had to pick 3, I'd probably pick the middle 3: net promoter, CSAT, and FCR.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the results, and let's just get these up on the screen. Slightly bigger sample size here of 80. Yeah, 2 out of 3 right there, Patrick. So the top one is customer satisfaction, followed by call scoring or monitoring of interactions, followed by first contact resolution. And interestingly, towards the bottom there is empathy, which is I would have thought was a sort of key attribute you'd want in the contact center. But I guess Daniel, must be a little bit difficult to measure.
Well, let me tell you why I think it came out this way, because I have a theory. So we'll start from the top again. Call scoring and monitoring interactions, absolutely. I think that's really important because your organization has certain behaviors it wants to bring to life in interactions with customers. So having qualified people, whether that's the team leader or a quality assurance person, listen to conversations, monitor them, help agents understand what they're doing well and where they can improve. There's a lot of power in that. So I expected that to be high, and I hope that continues to stay high. Net promoter score, we're getting into risky territory here. Net promoter score is a brilliant metric, but it's not recommended at the individual agent level. Because when you ask that question, how likely would you be to recommend our organization to your friend or colleague and so on, there's obviously so much that feeds into that response. It could be that the agent themselves has no part to play in it or a very small part to play in it. So most of the people that you will read and study will say NPS is great, but please don't take it down to the individual agent level. What's more common to hear for people who are using NPS is to say, by the way, how based on your experience, how likely would you be to recommend us? Fine, that's your NPS. And then they'll ask a specific question about how did you find the service from our staff member today? Then you can isolate the staff performance separate from the basket that NPS includes. So NPS can be a bit tricky.
And on NPS, I did some work with a big gas company that supplies, gas and electric. And what they found is that whenever they put their prices up, their NPS score, which they really value, drops about 10 points every time they put the price up. And it takes about a couple of months to get back to where they were. And so it's sort of they think it's a very important metric to view, but it can be a bit demotivating for the advisors working really hard, and then it just drops 10% because it's the view of the company rather than the view of the customer service.
That's absolutely right. And the agents will tell you, Dan, I got called into the office twice this month because my NPS score was low. What can I do? It's so demotivating. And they'll even say, even my boss doesn't seem to be happy about having this conversation. So she's not happy, I'm not happy. Why are we having this conversation? And I think it's a really valid point. So for anyone using NPS, of course it has tremendous value, but really think through how valuable is it at the agent level for an interaction or transaction. Is it really going to help you improve agent performance or backfire? Then you get down to good old customer satisfaction, however you measure that on your 10-point scale, your 5-point scale. I think this can be very useful, and the same comment applies. If you ask the customer for their overall customer satisfaction that day, or their willingness to buy again or come again or recommend you, you're again looking at an overall set of behaviors. It's probably a good idea to include a question related specifically to the agent if you want to focus in on the agent performance. First contact resolution, wow, a topic in and of itself. What I find works best is to take the first contact resolution measure and embed it into the call scoring or monitoring interactions. I see it as part of the call scoring. So you put in you put in your great tone of voice, you put in your accuracy, and you put in your FCR there. And then of course you decide the weightage. Maybe you say FCR is worth 10% of the score, 20% of the score, 30% of the score, whatever you think is relevant. And now I come down to empathy, same exact thing. Most people would include empathy inside the call scoring or monitoring interactions. I have a feeling that's why people scored low here. It's not that they don't think it's important. I think we all do. It's rather they'll say, Dan, my call scoring form already picks up empathy. Oh, and by the way, in our company, which is in healthcare, we assign a 30% weightage to empathy. So I think that's how it came out. Now, again, I want to talk about the basket here very quickly. Typically, if you don't want to go 100% call monitoring and do no customer satisfaction, but nor do you want to go 100% customer satisfaction. I had an interesting discussion with a global quality head a couple weeks ago, and he said, Dan, we used to measure all our agents on the customer satisfaction / NPS result, and we found that the agents were breaking all the rules to make customers happy. And that's obviously not what we wanted. So they've gone back to a blend of roughly 50% call scoring and 50% voice of customer, which I personally think is kind of healthy because you're looking at both sides of the coin here. So that's quality. Right. And this is how I sum it up. So at the end of the month, I hang this little picture up in my call center, and I say, guys, this is the team we were looking at. Every bubble represents one of the agents on my team. The vertical axis here is productivity, so from low to high, and the horizontal axis is my quality from low to high. So obviously, if I look at the folks in the upper right-hand quadrant, these are my superstars. They're giving me high productivity, they're giving me high quality. Based on what we just spoke about, they're turning up on time, they're signing in on time, they contribute what they need to AHT, as we said earlier, they're contributing what they need to service level. And then on the quality dimension, they're delivering what they need to for their call monitoring, as well as whatever voice of customer is in place. I would argue that people in the lower left-hand quadrant, oh my goodness, I don't really know what's going on with those folks, low productivity and low quality. On the bottom right-hand quadrant, we have people who have high quality but low productivity. I have a funny name for these people. I always call them Mariah Carey, the divas of my group, because when they decide to come to work and when they decide to sign in on the phones, they're really good. But my problem is getting them to come in on time, not disappear at lunch, not change their shifts with someone else and not tell me about it. And then if you look at the upper left-hand quadrant, these folks have high productivity and low quality. You typically see this with your newbies. When you hire a fresh new batch of people, they're pretty good about being on time. Of course, they're new hires. They want to impress you, but their quality struggles because frankly, in some organizations, it takes 6 to 9 months to get the hang of quality. It's not a simple thing to do. So to sum up this slide, I'll say this. The job of a team leader is to take both your hands and push those bubbles up into the right-hand quadrant. So when someone says, what's your job? I show them this picture and I say, make noise. That is your job. And obviously the way you're going to handle each one of these agents is going to be a little bit different depending on where they appear in the chart. So thank you, John T. So I think we can sum up. And there should be some words popping there. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the agent job of doing the right things, that can be summed up in your quality and your voice of customer side at the right time, and that can be summed up in your adherence side. You've got a pretty good handle on the agent job. So, and one last thing to talk about here on my side, John T, and that's attitude. So, my position is nobody has an attitude problem. I'm sure that a lot of heads are shaking right now. But here's the story that I use. Okay, when I used to run centers, the team leader and manager would come in and say, Dan, our staff or my staff has an attitude problem. And I'll say, okay, which attitude is it? And they say, what do you mean, which attitude? I'll say, nobody has an overall attitude problem because every job requires a certain set of attitudes to succeed. So can you tell me specifically which attitude is it that they're not performing on? And if my manager looked at me a bit blank, I say, not to worry, go back out, think about it, and then come back and tell me. So maybe an hour later, he or she would reappear and say, okay, Dan, I got it. Her challenge is initiative. Her challenge or his challenge is taking ownership. I'm like, there you go. Now you can go and do some work on it. But you're never allowed to walk into my office and say somebody has an attitude problem because there's a variety of attitudes involved. And I would also argue in the agent job as well. So I think this is our last poll question for the audience out there.
So this is not so much a poll question, but this is a question for the chat room, where we just ask you to type into the chat room, which attitudes do you believe contribute most to agent success? Is it things like ownership, resilience, empathy, whatever you want to put in there. There's no right or wrong answer to this. If you'd like to put that into the results, and then it'll take a little while for you to type that in, and then we'll pick that up in a couple of minutes' time.
Yeah, and Jonty, if it's okay, I'll just close out on this slide by saying this. I think the contact center management, maybe they work with HR, maybe they don't need to. That depends on your organization. You sit down and you come up with what are the 3, 4, or 5 attitudes that help make agents successful. And you start this through the interviewing process. So you ask interview questions that are designed around uncovering whether this person exhibits that attitude or doesn't exhibit that attitude. And the last thing I'd like to say on attitude is don't assume when people come to work, especially if it's their first job, they know what successful attitudes are. I think a lot of times at work, we're ending up having to fill in the gaps between their upbringing and their schooling. And sometimes they don't really know what resilience looks like around here. What does ownership look like around here? So to sum up, a lot of companies I see, or a lot of contact centers I see, most of the conversation that comes out of the mouth of the manager is productivity based. The second biggest topic is quality based. And the third, by far and away, is attitude. Hardly anyone seems to want to talk about attitude at work, even though I think we'd all agree that attitude fires up the productivity and quality side. So my advice, talk about productivity, talk about quality, and talk about attitude, because you need all three. You need all three. So,
indeed, thank you very much for that, Daniel Lord from OmniTouch. I think some great takeaways there. Factory logic doesn't apply to contact centers because the random call arrival. I think it's been one of the biggest problems we have is treating the call center like a factory. And I think you're right, it does drive negative behavior. We should measure the right things when it comes to agents. And if you're, good tip there, if you're looking at agent quality, then a sort of mix of 50% call or interaction scoring and 50% voice to customer sounds to be quite a sensible approach. Well, let's have a look at what attitudes people believe contribute most to agent success. Christine says displaying patience and perseverance. Perseverance, I think, is one we often miss in the recruitment process. James says ownership. Victoria says positive attitude. Jeffrey says professionalism. Claire also says resilience. Susie says teamwork, ownership, work ethic. We've got Hanneke says empathy and assertiveness. David, very good one here, proactiveness and ownership, very important for problem solving. Michael says pride of place. I think we could all be proud, or it would be great if we were all proud of our contact centers. Carol says all of the above. They're all good ones.
Yeah, good.
Trista says professional and empathy. Just got loads here. Sam says drive to get things right the first time. Empathy and accountability, says Scott. Adriana says taking constructive criticism positively. Certainly if you're on a complaints line, that can be hard to do. Pranitha says ownership, positivity. Matthew says willing to learn and adapt. Stephanie says customer focus. We've just got loads and loads of these, so a whole range, Daniel. So I think I think you're right when you say, if someone's got an attitude, which one is it? Is spot on. What are your thoughts on that long list, Daniel?
Well, I loved you reading it, and I could have listened to it for a couple more hours, but that'll waste everyone's time. I keep hearing, and it's what I hear a lot in Asia as well, is ownership and accountability. And I would attach professionalism to that, but taking ownership, taking accountability, maybe that links in a bit to what you guys were talking about on empowerment earlier. So.
Yeah, I think certainly ownership and accountability are quite an interesting one, because those are almost the things that most organizations almost take away from people. They say your role is very narrowly defined and your responsibility is very defined, and you can only be sort of accountable in a very narrow area, providing your average handling time is within 300 seconds and your adherence is within this level, and. So I think there could be some of the things in, maybe the factory logic that tends to drive away the accountability within that. So that's quite a range there. Well, let's go and have a look at the chat room and see what our two experts, Daniel and Patrick, make of some of the stuff that we've got coming through in the chat room. So the first opinion from Victoria says, I believe if you focus on customer satisfaction, then the Net Promoter Score will fall in line as standard. Patrick, we talked about Net Promoter Score earlier. Do you think that satisfaction and Net Promoter Score are somewhat linked?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you take care of your customers will take care of you. And I think there's an unbreakable link between those two things. So, great comment by Victoria.
Jeffrey's got a question for you, Daniel. I think you showed the different productivity between the different people and the 40% potential gain in productivity, 31% in quality. What time period were those results taken over?
I like to issue those results monthly, but of course you pick those results up daily, weekly, throughout the course of that month, but then have a final presentation at the end of the month. If your systems allow, and I think Patrick may talk about this, you may decide you want to present these results on an even more frequent basis, which is frankly where the industry is headed. So it's a great question.
Indeed. Adriana says, here's a tip. The first one, audience tip we've got coming through. Coaching every time you can and timely, recognizing achievements publicly and giving incentives. Involve them in decision making so they feel valued and appreciated. Daniel, I think that's a good tip.
Coaching every time you can. Yep.
Indeed. And I think also actually on coaching every time you can is almost giving thanks whenever you can. It's sort of like find a reason to go out and thank people. It's probably one of the biggest motivation techniques you can do is to say thank you.
But Jonty, can I slip in one thing on coaching very quickly? It probably raises more dust. one of the mistakes we see in coaching is that everyone thinks a scorecard is required every time. But actually, it's very difficult to coach to a scorecard. So covering a big topic in a very quick sentence or two, keep in mind there are times you want to talk to your agent just to help them. And when you're helping someone, you should not score them. I never help someone and say, I'm glad I helped you. Now I'm going to score you. That doesn't make any sense. So try and keep your scoring activities separated from your helping activities. And then you'll see people blossom. Poor contact center agents, they're scored on everything. It'd be nice for them to just be helped now and then.
Yeah, I think helping is good. And on the helping, Pranitha says encourage agent involvement and participation. Here's an interesting one. Kate says provide a great environment to work in and look after your staff the way you expect them to look after your customers. Why should they be nice to customers if they're getting a raw deal at work themselves? That's certainly one of the things I look at in a lot of contact centers. And let's pick up another tip. This is from Tom, who says give agents the right tools to do their job. The choice of headset, just give them the right tools. So I think that Patrick probably is quite a good time to hand across to you, where I think you're going to be looking at some of the ways that technology can help agents to be better at doing their job. So if we'd like to pass the slides across to you there, and you could share some ideas on how to give agents the right tools to do their job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what a great comment to segue. And, tools come in a lot of forms. So yeah, obviously there's physical tools, hardware and such, but it really getting into some of the more modern tools and ways that you can really start driving empowerment, engagement, and just performance overall. But I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to cover the technology side of the same focus areas that Dan talked about, while still aiming to provide some hints and tips about things you should look for or expect from your technology providers. We have a lot to cover here, so I'm going to try to get going here pretty quickly, make my timer going so I don't try to keep us on track here. So I'm going to start with productivity, kind of following the same path that Dan laid out. So for anyone on this call that has worked on the front lines, you know that managing multiple systems and having to toggle from one system to another is cumbersome. At times it can be stressful. A lot of this is similar to how Dan started out as well. And being able to consolidate the number of systems agents have to manage down to a single system or at most two will not only really ease that agent's effort, but it can also allow for a more efficient workflow and thus, of course, improve overall productivity. Along with a consolidated number of systems, ensuring that all of your primary technology that's in the hands of the agents has a modern and intuitive design can really further ease that effort and really have a positive impact on their productivity. The navigation and overall expectations of how to operate software is influenced by every single piece of tech that an agent engages with. So, if you think about it, the ease of texting has changed over the last 15 years. We used to have T9 was the initial way, and that's not exactly intuitive, so everybody had to learn how to do it. But nowadays, it's very much just like typing on your keyboard. So, all the technology that people use, iPhones or different smartphones and tablets, those are influencing what they expect from tech in general, whether it's at work or not. So, if things are logical and intuitive, it's easy to get lost. It's harder to get lost or confused about where to find things if it's just where they expect them to be, if the navigation is familiar. The ease of use of any software should be on the high priority side of your expectations from your technology providers. This all really simply boils down to ensuring that technology decision makers and leaders aim to have an agent-centric mindset when examining any piece of software that would be used by your frontline team members. If you can find ways to make the agent's work life easier, not only will you impact the morale and possibly retention, but of course the productivity, attentiveness towards your customers, and of course the customer experience would obviously have some positive impacts there as well. This next tip section in the productivity is really just aiming to streamline or streaming processes and workflows that should really be used that are part of their day-to-day tasks. Now, if they have a standard set of processes, the contact center, your leaders should really be looking for ways to examine this and review it on a regular basis to make sure that it's still the most efficient, it's still meeting both the customer's expectations, the business expectations, and of course, making life easier for those agents. The next tip here is that a strong knowledge-based system should be both in-depth as well organized and also always growing and being updated. A simple FAQ document is no longer enough to really serve the more complex type of interactions that we are all handling. And that's very similar to what Dan said as well. You know, handle times are going up because a lot of the self-service tools are handling all of the easier things. So, you know, a basic FAQ usually doesn't work out as well nowadays. Interactions are more complicated, and our supporting documents and tools really need to kind of follow suit and stay on pace with the evolution of our interactions. When you think about how to improve productivity, you may also think about handle time. This is a lot of what Dan was talking about as well. And we all know that simply telling agents to communicate faster has a whole lot of negative side effects. So that's not the right approach. Instead, find ways to pull information forward into the hands of the agent to arm them with things that can shorten the upfront portion of the engagement. So if the agent can immediately repeat or confirm information collected in the IVR or in a previous interaction, not only will this immediately give the customer more confidence in the agent's capabilities, it will also expedite the interaction and reduce handle time, saving money and of course increasing productivity. But more importantly though, on this particular point, is that customers will have more confidence in the business. So it actually improves the customer experience and productivity without kind of browbeating the agents to move faster, speak faster, or just act faster. It's really, you're solving it at the root in this kind of situation.
Yeah, I'm so often amazed that you know, the link between the IVR and the agent is still, after, you know, what, 25, 30 years of computer integration being available, still isn't as embedded as it could be.
Yeah. I mean, the technology exists to make it a seamless handoff. It's just that the adoption isn't quite where I would have expected it to be by now. These next two tips really go hand in hand. Really automate as much as possible and do as much as you can to provide systemic real-time support for agents. The best use of this tip that I can think of is to really think about deploying chatbots at the agent level. So chatbots are commonly paired with customers, you know, customer interface, and trying to deflect interactions entirely. But the trouble with that is that bots have to be trained to account for a huge array of possible scenarios, which takes a lot of time and effort and still might not provide the best experience to your customers. So, but since you have the ability to train your agents, you can actually teach them to work with the bots to ask things in a certain way and what keywords to include in what way. So this can expedite the time it takes to find answers, get support, without having to search around some sort of knowledge base on their own, or without having to contact like a help desk or assist team of some way. Again, reducing handle time, improving the customer experience, and overall productivity. I'm going to jump to the quality section here. So I believe that people don't really wake up and hope to be mediocre. In general, people want to do good and meet their objectives. That's just kind of, I think, human nature. And it's with this idea that these tips really come to you. So offering agent self-evaluations not only allows for self-reflection as it relates to the quality of service provided, but it also allows them to really become more familiar with the evaluation form, the questions, and of course the expectations of the business and the customers and what it takes to meet or exceed them. Additionally, some of these self-coaching tools can support this idea. So if you come up with a pre-canned coaching tool that addresses a specific result or behavior, then that would could be systemically assigned to an agent based on their overall evaluation score or a specific question within an evaluation. So the way that would work is someone misses question 1 and the system recognizes that they missed it, and they then assign coaching packet 1 as an example. And this really allows agents to be more empowered and take a greater level of ownership in their overall performance. You know, this idea brings the agents deeper into that quality conversation, and when paired with the traditional tactics like the quality team evaluating a defined number of contacts over a defined period, and even things like speech or text analytics can have a tremendous impact as well. So it's really kind of using this tip paired with some of those more traditional or even advanced things like speech to kind of create a full circle quality approach. The next tip here within the quality segment is a little broader, but it's still aimed at improving the quality of service provided by your agents. The top measurement of quality often includes customer satisfaction, as we talked about, NPS as an overall quality measurement, and of course the customer effort score. So customer satisfaction, as we saw in the poll, is often best collected through some sort of feedback coming directly from your customers. When offering customer surveys, you just have to be sure that you're offering them in multiple communication channels to improve your response rates and ensure that your results are more statistically valid and reliable. Some of the common response rates that I've seen are at best in the high single digit range, 9% or so, and some of the more industry leaders are in the mid to upper teens in their response rates, and that's using the traditional tactics. But if you're able to offer the surveys in more channels, you will undoubtedly improve your response rates, and again, kind of tie into that more statistically valid way. And when you think about what channels to offer these surveys in, I often encourage contact centers to examine the variety of channels you offer or you use in your personal lives. So how many people on the call would only use voice exclusively to communicate? Probably zero. And it's really interesting to me that if you really think about when you communicate with people in your personal lives, almost every phone call that I receive from friends or family has a lead-ahead text message. Hey, are you available? Do you have a minute? And this is becoming really the normal way to communicate, some sort of lead-ahead check-in to see if they're available. And despite the technology existing to support this action, we don't really see a ton of adoption yet. But as this behavior becomes more pervasive, I suspect that more businesses will be forced that direction and ultimately support a better customer experience. Lastly, I wanted to provide a quick tip about NPS. So, kind of as Dan and Jyoti said earlier, the NPS is a great overall measurement, and I'm a huge fan of the rating system. But the piece that many companies miss is to understand where their results fall in comparison to the rest of their industry. So if your NPS score is X, is that good or bad? Just because it improved over a certain period, you still may not know if that's really good or bad. But if you're able to compare your results to the results within the industry, in your industry, then you'll have a better sense of whether or not they're good or bad. But more importantly, if your NPS results are in the top tier performers in your industry, that can become your marketing competitive differentiator. So that's really an important thing. So my point to that is when you do examine technology partners, look for partners that have the ability to provide that NPS comparison within your industry. This last section of tips here is really focused around agent engagement. So as Daniel mentioned, providing regular individual performance updates to agents is critical in your effort to have a notable impact. I would take this one step further and tell you that not only do you need to have this regular, but ideally as accessible, as close to real time as possible with access directly by the agent. So it really enables your agents to compare their performance to the objectives, or even ideally even compare their performance to their peers or their team or the operation as a whole. Just have a better gauge of if they're really helping the team, if they're hurting the team, and just really what areas need the greatest degree of focus. As mentioned at the beginning, the entire agent experience is going to be kind of born out of, and that empowerment really comes out of the access that you give them, the permissions that you give them. And part of this can be done through a really nice and friendly agent portal. So the agent portal often should have all the key metrics and key key areas of focus for all the agents. And really, that's something that you should be looking for in any type of individual agent performance management tool. And these kinds of things can have a great ability to not only improve performance, but improve engagement. And you can see the little quote here about disengaged agents and how that can have a huge impact, negative impact on your overall operation. Jumping to the next one here, my last section of tips is really focused on bringing fun, interactive methods to your operation to electrify agent engagement. Simply setting goals isn't really enough anymore, and agents really need to get, or our goal really is to get agents more involved in their work as a whole. To really foster a performance culture without browbeating your team, you have to really get them excited to be there and excited to be part of the team effort. I know some of those comments earlier were really talking about teaming and working as a team, and some of the objectives and goals that Dan mentioned could also be more team oriented and less agent specific, but of course agents contribute in a way. So this overall tip is really around gamification, which is gamification is a concept that isn't new, but the delivery of gamification through software brings a new level of sophistication that was never possible back when gamification initially consisted of maybe a cork board with some sort of horse race that you may update on a daily or weekly basis to kind of inform people of what their team or their individual performance was doing. So software really allows you to see all that in real time, and it really brings some of the things you might see in video games into your operation, and you can gamify every single metric that you capture at the agent level. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was creating kind of a basket of metrics that you want them to focus on, and gamification really allows you to create that basket and give it a lot of structure around coming up with those incentives and drivers and motivators to get agents to participate or be more engaged in things like schedule adherence, quality, handle time if that's required, and so on. And you can even tie, in a good gamification tool, you can even tie badges and just general achievements. You can assign point values to performance, and you can even put prizes in place that can be redeemed through points or just redeemed through milestone-based achievements. My favorite gamification capability is to enable agents to initiate and manage peer-to-peer competition entirely on their own without any assistance from leadership. So really what this does is it allows agents to wager against each other and have the ability to define what metric they want to wager, what the goal is, me versus my coworker, whoever has the highest adherence after a month or highest quality scores by the end of the month gets the defined point value. So it's entirely in the agent's control. You're giving them empowerment, but it's important to remind in the contact center economy, the leadership sets the rules by which the agents operate. So even if you enable agents to have peer-to-peer competition, you still have the governance over what can and can't be done. So I'm going to take a very brief moment here, just give you a quick sneak peek at the Nice in Contact gamification and performance management product called InView. So I'm going to go through this in about 30-40 seconds here. So here's a view of what the leadership or supervisors might do, just kind of gives an overall team performance, couple trend lines and gauges to see what is working and where people are performing. This is kind of the governing view to see how you can assign point values or earning badges based on specific performance metrics or achievements. We can actually even allow agents to manage their own avatars. So you have their profile view there on the left, and that person has earned badges. That little section in the middle shows challenges that you can assign. You can tell John Smith to improve sales by 5% and get X. You can also allow agents to earn avatar accessories based on performance, and they can dress up their avatar accordingly. So you can really see that a lot of this is those gaming or gamification video game type of techniques brought into contact center. The last couple slides here, this is just a quick view on what it could look like to manage a coin bank or point bank if you chose to call it points instead of coins. Just really a quick snapshot of a historical view. The last thing here is you can actually also, through our product, have a defined marketplace and define something worth points or coins. And in this case, we're giving away a parking spot. You can have some entertainment things in there as well, or even some physical products, in this case, like an Xbox. This is how I wrap it up. So this is just kind of the summary slide, letting you guys know what some of the key tips and things you should be looking for when you're examining new technology providers, things you should really be expecting from your existing technology providers. And I'm not going to read through this. This is a takeaway, but you'll have access to this presentation after the fact. And I'm a little bit over on time, but I wanted to thank you guys so much for your time and attention. And if you do need to reach out to me personally, there's my contact info, but Jonty will give you some more information about how to reach out to us right after this.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I think some great takeaways there. A strong knowledge base is needed that is continuously updated. Just FAQs don't do it anymore. People don't wake up and hope to be mediocre. I think that's very true. It's about the environment we provide, and certainly things like self-coaching tools can help within that. Customer feedback, I think we do need a variety of different channels for doing that, rather than just a post call IVR, so things like Text messaging can be great for doing that. I love the bit on gamification between advisors. I bet you I can get my quality scores higher than you today, or something along that line. And that quote, "Any product that needs a manual to work is broken," does make me think that there should perhaps be a better link between the contact center and the product design teams. And I'm seeing in some forward-thinking organizations, they're inviting their designers to come down and spend a day in the contact center listening to some of the problems that people have. And it gets the designers thinking in a different way, thinking, hey, to me, that was self-explanatory, but obviously we're not there. And you've got a huge amount of design stuff that comes back that you could feed back in. So some great stuff there. Thank you very much for that, Patrick. Well, let's have a look at a few top tips and questions. Sam says, treat your staff as you would expect them to treat your customers. I think that's very great. Victoria says, I'm loving the gamification. This would certainly be a great fun way to engage the teams. And I guess that with things like the World Cup, if you could tie that into your gamification system, could work well. I don't know if you've heard any of any ideas of gamification with this is obviously the Soccer World Cup, so which outside of North America is actually very huge.
Well, it's growing over here, but yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've done, or when I last managed a BPO, is we actually allowed our top performers or most improved performers to actually sit and watch World Cup while on the clock. So that was kind of one of the incentives that we put in place, and it actually got a huge response. So definitely you can tie those kinds of things in a lot of ways.
Wonderful. Stephanie says, I tend to find out what my people want to work on or improve, then identify how this links with our business and customer needs or objectives. Setting the right stepping stones with smart actions and keeping working on this until it's achieved. And finding examples of where it's been done or not. Coaching on this, including self-reflection, and then celebrating success and exploring what has stopped them. Daniel, I'd love this one.
Yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah, I like the self-reflection part. Yeah. In Asia, we would say it takes two hands to clap. It's quite a common expression we use. So.
Excellent. So now that's great. Let's have a look at what else we've got. Creating dashboards with quality scores of the team and allowing them to view on how they're performing in comparison with their peers. The view could have weekly, monthly number of evaluations and scores. Patrick, that looks similar in tip to, I think, some of the panel you showed, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is, and really, it's a great suggestion. It's a great tip, and I think the way that you deploy it is really the tricky part. You need to make it easy, updated regularly and consistently, so that people can depend on seeing those kinds of updates. If they can't depend on it, it's not worth your effort.
Yeah, that would be great. And let's have a look at an audience opinion. Praneeth says, I agree. Self-evaluation encourages ownership and understanding of the quality criteria. We've recently stated that our organization it's contributing to the improvement of quality standards and agent performance. Mike here says, the key to motivating your staff is to keep things fresh. Any job, how much you enjoy it, can become monotonous. This is even more true for the call center environment. So refresh your old incentives, refresh your rewards, and refresh your motivational games to keep your contact center lively. I think Daniel and Patrick, I think that's probably a great tip to end this section on.
Yeah, I like it.
Agreed, totally agree. And part of the ability to make things fresh often is to ensure that you have the easiest method to make changes. So I would advocate for software to help solve that too.
Indeed. Well, we've been having so much fun. We've almost hit the top of the hour. So we'll just in terms of feedback for us, if you'd like to put into the chat room, what did you like best about the webinar? If you'd like to fill in the survey, that's another way of giving us feedback. It's only 4 questions long. And if you'd like to have a demonstration of the nice in-contact solution of either the quality scoring or the gamification or any of the dashboards you've seen, in addition to any of the other areas that Patrick has talked about, just fill in the box in the webinar survey and we'll get that arranged for you. You can watch the replay available later on today. callcenterhelp.com/recorded webinars be available in about an hour's time. And today's winning tip is identify to find out what people want to work on and improve. That was a great tip from Stephanie. So there's either a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for you. So our last webinar will be of the summer series Customer Experiences this time next week. I'd just like to say thank you to our two speakers who I think have done a terrific performance today. Daniel, thank you for joining us from OmniTouch International.
Thank you, Jonty. It was super fun.
And Patrick, thank you for joining us from Nice in Contact.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone, and we'll see you all again this time next week. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.